I'd like to talk to you now about something we call pullback, and it's a slightly more advanced technique. And what pullback is basically is whereas instead of stopping the rod, we're actually going to give it a little pull back. It's quite a subtle movement at the end of the stroke, at the end of the casting stroke, and it's sort of incorporated within the casting stroke. And I think one of the best ways of teaching pullback is a method that Mel Krieger used. I don't know if he was actually teaching pullback, but it's a great way of learning it. And it's where take the rod without the line, and just like you were going to wiggle around in the shop because you were going to imagine that this was going to tell you something about the rod. It doesn't really tell you anything about the rod. But if you just bounce to the rod at the end of the stroke, so bounce, bounce, this is in fact pullback, because instead of just coming forward and stopping, we're pulling back with the hand. And that's the way I teach it. And if you imagine this, you'd come forward, instead of stopping the rod at the hand, we actually come back a little bit. Here, bounce. And what this actually does, this accomplishes three things. It actually puts an S shape in the rod. And instead of the rod just bending like this, you're actually putting a little bend backwards, and it comes up, and that increases the speed of the tip. It also lifts the rod tip slightly, which will close up your loop. It's a great way of throwing tight loops to make this pull back. And the third thing, it actually increases the amount of counterflex that you get in it, because you've put more force into the rod during the stroke. Those are the theories anyway, and we're not quite sure which one is the most effective, but they're the three things that happen. But the important thing is to make the end of your stroke with a little flick backwards. Okay, so this is a loop here without pullback, and now I'm going to use pullback. A little bit more speed, a little bit tighter. Using pullback for me is not about distance. It's purely about throwing a narrow loop. So anytime you've got to throw a loop into a gap, or you need a tight loop roll cast, it's a very useful thing to throw into your cast. So a lovely little thing to have. And it gives the rod a different feeling. You actually you're feeling the rod bounce under your hand. You've got to hold it a little bit more relaxed. You've got to use that grip we talked about before, leading with the palm. You can't get that pull back from the wrist in that plane. You've got to get it from using the wrist like you were throwing a ball. Bounce, bounce. And some rods feel really good with pullback and some don't. This rod feels fantastic with it, surprisingly.